All right, guys, when we do graphing in this class, there will always be a checklist to make sure that you have everything that you need for the graph. For this activity, you guys are going to be graphing, and you will need to realize that for a graph, you always have to have data. If you don't have data, then there's nothing to graph. And the data for activity 12, for example, chemistry of materials, that is found in the cards that you guys will have. After you realize what your data is, then you will decide which graph is the best. It might be a bar graph, it might be a line graph, it might be a pie graph. Those are the most popular, but you need to decide which graph is best. Then you need to give your graph a title. What are you going to be graphing? You need to give axis labels on each side, the x-axis and the y-axis. Don't label them x and y-axis. You need to tell me, like, on one side percent and on the other side people. Then you need to number your axis evenly, and I will show you what I mean by that. Use a ruler anytime you're going to be drawing a line. You need to use a ruler to try to make a straight line. And then, of course, at the end, I always want you guys to add color. It just really makes your graphs stand out, and graphs are supposed to be attractive. Okay, so here is a graph that I have started. Here's a piece of graph paper. And as you can see up at the top, I have my title. It says percent recycled, and I even listed the cards where I obtained my information, cards 7, 12, and 16. On the y-axis, I have a label that I have decided because I'm going to do the percent of recycled material. So on my y-axis, I've labeled percent. And then on my x-axis, I chose the 3 materials that we are going to be focusing on, which is aluminum, glass, and plastic. And I'm going to list the percent for each one of those. Just to be clear, I am not going to be exact in my measuring just because I do not want to give the answer away to you, but I will just do enough to give you an example. Okay, so you guys will have to make your graphs start out exactly like this, and then you will have to make sure that you have your graph evenly spaced for numbers. Here's what I mean by that. So again, I'm drawing a really bad line, I am sure, but just for example purposes, you would draw a line using a ruler on your graph, and then you would label the numbers that you want represented for each space. So like, I don't know, I might have them labeled 2s. So like I might have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, on up. And that would be what I would use for the percents. Then I would go through and I would enter my data. So like, let's say aluminum is 4%. And again, I'm just making up numbers. So I would draw right to 4% for aluminum, and I would color that in because I want to add color. Maybe glass is 2%, so I'm going to change my color, and for glass I'm just going to draw to 2% and shade it in. And let's imagine that plastic, like aluminum, is also 4%. Okay. Now, one thing I don't like about this graph is, for example purposes, I did not make my numbers very high. I just went 2 to 4. But in real life, I think it would be better and easier to see trends in your graph if you took up the whole entire graph paper. So if you have small numbers, then you probably want to make your numbers on the axes, you probably want to make them smaller so that way you can spread out your graph. And vice versa for long number, or for big numbers, you might want to do larger numbers, maybe increase by 10s instead of by 2s. It is up to you. It's just whatever your data is telling you, that is how you would label the numbers. I would say that that is probably the hardest thing for students to understand, is how do I number my graph. So if you can figure that out, then I definitely would say you have it made. After you're finished with a graph, then you guys would turn this in, and it would be worth points to you. Sometimes we might make our graphs on computer programs like Excel or Keynote, but most of the time we're going to be doing our graphs by hand, just like this. Let me know if you have any questions. Good luck.